Kai, welcome to Coloring Crypto. Before we get started, can you just give a quick introduction for us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I work at a company called TrueLink Financial, which does financial services for vulnerable seniors and people with special needs, people with sometimes trouble making decisions or vulnerable to fraud. And so I sort of became aware of the crypto space, both because, if you sort of imagine that you're setting up a new financial institution in the modern world, and in particular, if your goal is protecting people from fraud, a lot of the use cases are, related to identity verification or transacting or, sort of a bunch of similar things. And I have a background as a software developer. And so, basically the thing that I found over and over again was, and this is sort of like leading into our conversation, the thing that I found over and over again was that as I was sort of approaching something from a problem-solving perspective, it was like, wow, this thing is, it's very hyped for this topic, but it really just kind of doesn't help with it. And then meanwhile, I was sort of in the fintech world, and so I was, sitting next to a lot of people at conferences, and it just seemed to kind of keep on falling apart. And so I guess, the sort of background working in, as a software developer and historically a machine learning person, and then going into financial services and just sort of having the like, wow, none of this is real kind of reaction. And so basically I wrote this blog post. I wrote it in maybe July and kind of never posted it because I didn't think anyone particularly had why would anyone be interested in what I have to say about blockchain? And then in December over the holidays, I was just kind of like, I guess maybe whatever, I'll just put this on the internet and see what happens. And this was, I published it, I think about December 20th, which was maybe the day after the peak price of Bitcoin. So just before the whole, sort of meltdown started. And so maybe it was in the news at the time, or maybe everybody was off for the holidays sitting on their couch on their phone, kind of halfway paying attention to their relatives, but it sort of took off. And so now I'm a minor internet celebrity as a Bitcoin skeptic.
It was December 22nd, and the headline was 10 years in, nobody has come up with a use for blockchain, which is, I love that the timing of it was like, this peak price of Bitcoin, and along you come and basically say, there's nothing happening here. And then just recently, also I want to throw out on April 5th, you put out a second article that also seems to be going viral again, where, the title of this one is "Blockchain is not only crappy technology, but a bad vision for the future." So can you, I kind of went through and took some notes on the article, and for folks out there who want to find this, we'll have the links in the show notes, but these are both on Medium. Kai, can you kind of just lay out the basics of the article? Well, first of all, tell me, the articles to me seem to kind of, they're sort of, part of the same theme. And maybe you can kind of just help explain your thoughts around, why the blockchain is not all that the hype seems to make us want to believe it is.
Yeah. So the first one was really just kind of ticking through kind of a bunch of purported use cases, right? So micropayments, supply chain, store of value, way to keep a ledger at a stock exchange, smart contracts, this whole sort of universe of things, identity verification, elections, anti-corruption stuff, corporate bookkeeping. And I just kind of tried to tick through them one by one and sort of point out, escrow would be another one, keeping titles, sort of ownership records, domain resolution, sort of why you wouldn't choose a blockchain solution over the conventional solution, the sort of the quote unquote old way. And then in the second one, I was sort of trying to go, maybe a little deeper than kind of a laundry list about, why is it that that the status quo way is better than the blockchain way. And really the kind of argument is, that in the first one you could just sort of say, well, we haven't come up with a better way yet after the first 10 years, but this is still in its infancy. It's a foundational technology. Give us another decade and we'll figure out something this is good for.
Right.
And my argument in the second one is really that it's actually kind of a step in the wrong direction. That the foundation of blockchain is this sort of trustless, way to sort of, it's almost like you're mathematically verifying good behavior, and so you don't need to trust your counterparty, right?
Right.
There's a consensus algorithm. You're trusting an algorithm, a smart contract. You don't have like a fiat government, a middleman, et cetera. And the argument is that actually middlemen and trusted counterparties and trust-creating institutions are so valuable that actually, in the end, you are reverse engineering trusted institutions on top of blockchain, and so often you see it like sort of almost like an afterthought, right? That you sort of say, well, okay, we've created this like kind of like no trust, blockchain clearing thing, but our blockchains are so slow and inefficient at actually clearing transactions. So we'll have to do off-blockchain transactions with, trusted counterparties who can then sort of aggregate them and push them back onto a blockchain. And you sort of say, wait, you just constituted a trusted counterparty system almost as an accident. Now, so it's like where there's a Rocky Mountain Institute has an ICO that they're planning. I think they're pre-selling it right now. And they're sort of saying, oh, this is like, this is decentralized. We're cutting out the middlemen. We're democratizing energy. And then, it turns out that they sort of say, well, you say, how do you verify that the energy credits you're selling are real? And they say, well, it's actually a permission blockchain, and the only people that have permissions are the big utility companies. And you're like, wait, what? Like, why did you give control over the, sort of energy grid and clean energy production, take it from the regulators and give it to the utilities? That's like the opposite of progress. But it turned out that who has permissions was sort of like an afterthought, because the premise is you don't need trust. And then you're like, oh, we do need trust, actually. So that's kind of the argument of the second one, is you have to put trust at the center when you're trying to build a brave new world. And I hope that we can create more trustworthy institutions. The point is not, we should all trust our government, trust our financial institutions, and so on, voting systems, escrow, supply chain, whatever. The point is that it's really hard work to do this, and that you can't sort of wave a blockchain technology wand at a problem and your trust issues go away. So what does it take to make Wells Fargo transparent and accountable? Wells Fargo, kind of had its issues over the years, right? What would it take to make our government transparent and accountable? Definitely has had its issues. And if blockchain could magically make our financial institutions and governments, responsible and accountable and transparent, oh my God, I'd be first in line. But actually, building these things takes time. You have to go vote and stuff. It's really hard.
So yeah, I want to kind of parse through this where, on the one hand, you've got a lot of great examples, you go into these use cases where you're like, look, it's not really working. But then I guess what I want to get at is even like the concept of decentralization. Are you just saying that it's like it's a much harder than we're admitting to do that, or that the fundamental idea of decentralization will just never really work, in your opinion?
Well, decentralization, it's sort of like a metaphor, right? So obviously on one end of the spectrum is a monopoly, right? And there are reasons that monopolists are not trustworthy. They're rent-seeking. On the other end of the spectrum is, sort of a complete absence of institutions whatsoever, right? Each man is an island. You walk up to somebody on the street, you judge if they're stronger than you or not, whose swords are better or whatever. And there's no sort of mediating institutions that would cause you to be anything more than strangers. And I think the theory of blockchain is typically that because you both can trust in the underlying technology, that two strangers who have no basis for common trust can interact directly without any intermediaries. And so, and yes, I don't believe that that's a sane system at all. I think that that's like, kind of the opposite of the last 1,000 years worth of history. That and I described it as, sort of like the Somalia system, right? Or like, a sort of medieval approach to things where, you sort of, you don't have any intermediating institutions. And so, yes, I guess basically, yes, I don't think radical decentralization will be helpful. I think that if I'm buying an ebook, I want to buy it from somebody that I trust, and I'm not going to trust this individual. But also, software is a really, really crappy way of creating trust. Like, in fact, what you're doing is trusting not just the particular blockchain applications you're using, but you're trusting your own ability to kind of navigate in this blockchain world. So it's like if your blockchain wallet gets hacked, it's like your own fault. You're not good enough at technology, and that's like that as a banking system. It's that's what the Middle Ages looked like. It's bad.
I mean, it's interesting. There is so much, but when I started this podcast maybe six months ago, there's so many cheerleaders and there's so much hype around it with this core idea that it's saying the fastest way to send money among untrusted parties and low to no fees for sending money, and you compare that to what's happening today. With like I think the one of the best examples is sending money around the world to different countries and between banks.
Right.
It takes 3 to 5 days, and it's just ridiculous seeming in this digital world. And Bitcoin's immediate, with its problems of being a slow network.
Sure.
I mean, I think in a way you got me thinking like that we're so binary in a lot of this conversation a lot of times, and it's like it's the best thing ever, to like it's never going to work. It's like it's probably going to have some interesting evolution that we can't predict. If there was a use case that the blockchain would have the best chance to succeed in providing a better solution than what we're used to with our institutions and those things, what would it be?
I think, here's the thing, right? In its best applications, I think the ones that are closest to reality, closest to production. You think about, for example, Factum is a company that does, sort of verifies documents, and so they will publish a hash of your document to the blockchain, and they have this internal set of hashes, and so they're just publishing, I don't know, once a day or whatever. Using a tiny transaction, and it's sort of like a clever system, right? That's like that's a valuable company. I don't know that it's like a great company, but it's a valuable service to establish that your document was authentic in a publicly recordable way. And there's kind of a couple others like that. Ripple would be another example of, exchanging money between banks more quickly is a great system. But in kind of each of those cases, the thing that you find is that where blockchain is closest to reality, it is the most being used like an ordinary database. And it's like a sort of like it's like a slow database. But you can sort of like, because of the hype, you can raise more capital for your new database application, and that's kind of cool, right? But fundamentally, if you took away the blockchain entirely, Ripple's operations wouldn't be affected. They would literally, it's like you could somebody trips over a power cord, and Ripple is disconnected from the internet. Like you could nobody would notice for a couple of days at Ripple's customers, right? They don't actually use it.
In your article, you explained Ripple, and I'm not an expert at all, and it was a surprise to me where you said, the currency that people are, can buy, the cryptocurrency that Ripple has is not at all what the banks are using. That is its business that they're allowing to transfer money. Can you just explain how that works?
Yeah, so Ripple has, Ripple has two products at the companies that are developing. One of them is basically a competitor to SWIFT, the interbank transfer system that you use for international wire transfers. And that's SWIFT. It's so complicated. I can sort of almost explain it, but basically the point is, like, I as an individual want to transfer money to some other individual. SWIFT is like a way to search for a traversal path among the nodes, such that, my local bank, Redwood Credit Union, has a correspondent account at Bank of America, which has a correspondent account at Barclays, which has a correspondent bank at, First Bank of Leeds. And so everybody's interconnected. There's a ledger balance transfer at each of these. There's an FX quote, and you end up with the money. And, everybody's like taking a bite of the apple along the way, and it's slow and it's expensive and it's a mess. It's not a very good system. And especially for the end user, for a sort of power user, right? If I'm, a hedge fund in New York, I'm transferring money in 10 minutes, but as an individual, it's expensive. Sure. Ripple has two products, one of which is a basically kind of literal competitor to this system. It's a Swift knockoff, and that's very successful. Swift is a very successful system. It is great that there's a competitor. People are using it. The second thing is the thing that you always imagined that cryptocurrency would be good for, where instead of going through Barclays and Bank of America, Redwood Credit Union can buy some ripples, transfer them over to First Bank of Leeds. Leeds sells the ripples, and you get your money, and everybody's so happy because it cut out 4 different middlemen, right? Turns out actually nobody wants that, because what you need is a dollar Ripple gateway, which is provided by, for example, Bank of America, and a British pound gateway, which is provided by Barclays. And so you have Bank of America buying ripples and Barclays selling ripples for pounds. But neither of them actually wants to hold the ripples. And so you sort of imagine the two of them are transferring ripples one to the other, and you say, they have a correspondent account already. Would you rather buy and sell some ripples, or would you rather just send the money directly between the two of you? And of course, they don't want to buy and sell ripples. So it turns out that actually, in order to build a workable blockchain system, you have to add intermediaries because basically the sort of trust and overhead is so great. So it just falls apart when you actually try to build a system, in other words. And you imagine that Toyota says they build a rocket-powered car that is totally unsafe, and so nobody buys it, and then they build their ordinary cars that everybody uses. You say, like, does Toyota's adoption prove that people want rocket-powered cars? And the answer is, like, no. Literally, if anyone in the world could, what's his name? I'm blanking on his name. Founder of Ripple was briefly the literal world's richest person, on paper. And if he couldn't figure out a way to use blockchain to transfer money internationally or cryptocurrency, wow. I mean, that's just like think about that for a second. That's profound. It's like if Amazon said, hey guys, we can't figure out a way to use the internet to sell books. Like, we're just, and then there's a word for that, it's a bookstore, right?
So after you wrote these articles, I'm curious, I mean, the reaction I saw was a lot of people seemed to welcome this sort of sober voice. But also we've had Jackson Palmer, the creator of Dogecoin, on a couple times. And he sort of said he gets really tired of getting called a hater because he's just pointing out, that the blockchain isn't perfect and people just attack him on Twitter. What kind of reaction did you get? What was the response?
I would say there's maybe 4 categories. There's a group of people who, I would say, I had somebody the other day say, I thought, my PhD in math from MIT was kind of enough that people wouldn't tell me that I don't understand how technology works. But that's, so there's a lot of people who I would say kind of had their doubts, but nobody had really articulated them before. And so there was a following from that. A second group is people that are sort of still believers, but sort of think that, a robust dialogue is helpful, and that, that frankly the hype is distracting to the people who are trying to work on real stuff.
Yeah.
That if you took out, a lot of the sort of cryptocurrency sort of like bubble and speculation, these overhyped ICOs that fall apart, that actually sets us back, because you mix like, a scoop of ice cream with a wheelbarrow full of bullshit, and the ice cream's lost. And then the, maybe third group is like, kind of the you just don't get it people.
They're telling you that. They're saying you just don't get it.
Yeah, you're living in the past,
Yeah.
Interestingly, what I was going to call Group 4 was sort of saying, it's in its infancy, and people will often make analogy to the internet. They will say, nobody knew what the internet was for 10 years, and this is, or like, IBM, like they're one of those guys who said, the personal computer market is 5 computers. Back when IBM was founded, it's just like you just, and it's like a particular flavor of you just don't get it. And remarkably, one of the early internet pioneers posted in the comments thread also, and he was like, I hear this all the time, and it offends me, because when we built the internet, what we wanted was a better way to send messages and share files. We built a better way to do that. It was better at that day one. We didn't understand the implications of the technology, but we built it for a purpose. It wasn't like, hey, let's build an internet and see if anyone needs it, right? And I think similarly for IBM, they dramatically underestimated the importance of computers, but they built them for a reason. It wasn't like, oh, let's like spend a couple $1 billion on this technology, and like maybe in the future somebody will figure out something it's good for. That's just sort of like not actually the model of technology adoption. Is people pouring billions of dollars into useless stuff, hoping that someday somebody in the future will like want it.
Well, okay. Let me play devil's advocate, though. I mean, like, the first days of the internet, you get on there and you wanted to send a message, but for me, I had my first. I actually went to Berkeley. I know you went to Stanford. I remember going down into like the bottom of the math, department in like 95 or 94, getting on email and, sending emails to my brother in the Soviet Union. And it was a big chore to go do that, to go to the place. If you're doing dial-up, it was super slow. So it did work, but it was slow and cumbersome, certainly much faster than a letter. But, I mean, couldn't we say, like, there are people that use Bitcoin for very functional, purpose to send, money to somebody. It's a little bit cumbersome. And that's the analogy. That's why it's sort of like the early days of the internet.
It's just like, I just don't think it is, right? Like at that time, you could say like the internet is the best way to communicate with your family in the Soviet Union. It was cumbersome, but it was still the best way. I think it is. I think that there are real challenges to the system of international money transmission. What I really hope is, one of my biggest hopes is that this bubble will capitalize remittances startups that even after everybody abandons blockchain will compete with people like Western Union, who are like stealing tons of money from very poor people all over the world. I think it's just totally. I really want people to come compete with them.
Yeah.
But I guess the thing I would say is, if you imagine like you had set up everything it takes to be a Western Union competitor. You had like, the branches where the like, people, working abroad, could go and deposit their paycheck, and you had like another branch, in like the sort of village where their family lives, and they could like put in money and, like Saudi currency, and, their family could take it out in Thailand or, sort of Malaysia, Bangladesh. And suppose you'd set up everything you needed other than the transfer technology. My assertion is that at that point, you wouldn't actually use blockchain. You would choose something else, because when it comes down to implementation, blockchain is just sort of like a pretty bad way to do it. So I hope that people build better remittances systems. I'm super passionate about that. But and perhaps the hype will help, but I don't think blockchain is helpful.
And do you say, so like with this? I mean, I'm just curious, like with the responses you've gotten and kind of like, yeah, I was texting a friend last night who is doing an ICO, and I was like, hey, I've got that, this guy Kai on tomorrow on the podcast. He's like, oh yeah, I read that article. I think most people did read your articles. So like what are you seeing? Like, what will be the indicators over the next like 6 months to a year that you'll say like, see, that's what I'm talking about. This is what this is sort of like, evidence of your more evidence of your sort of your thesis.
Well, the kind of key takeaway for me is that the whole thing is a Ponzi scheme, right? And that when people say, look, these are fundamentally, if the coins weren't appreciating, I think we would all be having a very different conversation, right? If you imagine,
for
right,
sure.
like let's just take out coins appreciate from the equation and just say like, how many people would be interested in this? How many people would choose an ICO instead of a traditional equity raise, right? It's like, it really is just about coin appreciation. And I think there may be, several dozen people who would be like, look, this is beautiful technology. I'm interested in the applications. And the fact that there is wealth creation going on is actually just immaterial to me. There's a few dozen, I'm sure. But coin appreciation, to me, like believing that most of the stuff will not actually end up in application, it's just sort of like literally a Ponzi scheme, right? Like every dollar out is somebody else putting a dollar in. And Ponzi schemes make money for the early investors. They just do, right? And so, like Bernie Madoff's first 10 years were like incredible. He was the star of Wall Street, right? That's because Ponzi schemes, you're cheating, right? So of course you win if you cheat. But then if you were the last investor in a Ponzi scheme part of the last years, you lose everything because your money's already gone, right? There's nobody buying. And predicting when a Ponzi scheme melts down is sort of very difficult. I think if the sort of Bitfinex tether thing unwinds, and that I think that could be sort of a trigger, but who knows? It's really sort of out of anybody's control. And I guess the thing to me, I actually think Ponzi schemes are very unethical. That there will be people who, well, let me say this. This is an unusual thing for me to be saying, but the moral case for capitalism, we all want to make money, right? But the reason capitalism exists is because it's an efficient way to allocate capital to productive uses, and investor confidence in the market has made trillions of dollars of capital. Middle class families trust the stock market, and that makes trillions of dollars of capital available to useful businesses around the world who are creating value and progress. Yeah. And so when we steer so much money to these Ponzi schemes, it's not only costing us, real progress that other people could be making, but it undermines investor confidence in the market. And, when people lose their homes, lose their jobs, lose their health care in this meltdown, there's a real consequence. And it's like the reason we're not living in the Soviet Union is because we are so good at creating investor confidence and applying capital to useful things. So I think it's it's like an ethical thing, participating in the Ponzi scheme.
You also mentioned earlier that the hype and around everything, it really is just distracting for the true hard workers who have their heads down and are trying to build something with this. And it's also like it's the when these coins go so much so up in value, it just kills the utility of the original coin. And I know a lot of ICOs are trying to do or some were trying to do this structure where they would have their sort of investment coin and then their stable coin, and then it was like, well, how are they connected? And it was just there are a lot of areas that people seem to be kind of just doing it to raise money, and it'll be interesting.
These quote unquote utility coins. I mean, to me, it's just put on the prospectus, we do not intend this to increase in value. If you want it for its utility, please buy it for its utility, or maybe just guarantee that it won't increase in value. Put a call option on it. Say like, we're selling these for $2 a coin, but the company has a call option. We can redeem them for $2.50 in 2 years if we want to. But if you want them for their utility, then that's great. You should totally buy them now. Nobody would buy them. It's just about appreciation.
Yeah. Have in the feedback you've gotten now since you are crypto famous in this corner of the world here, who have you, like, who do you follow on Twitter, or who do you kind of turn to? And I'm actually mostly interested in who do you think has had the sort of smartest counter argument, or who kind of made you think the most with their comments on your post or in conversations?
Gosh, I think I have a Twitter handle, but I don't think I've tweeted in a handful of years. I think at some point I was like, I really want to have a Twitter handle, and so I like tweeted like 3 things all at the same time 3 years ago. And then somebody was, I don't think I tweeted these 2 articles. Somebody was like, oh, like a lot of people are mentioning you on Twitter, and I'm like, oh, I have a Twitter handle. Oh yeah, I guess I do. So
right.
In a funny way, like I've sort of like read the comments threads, and there was some press. There was, a funny thing. It was so Breitbart did a takedown, and there's an argument that actually like getting taken down by name in Breitbart should be like kind of on my life goals list, right? Like a real
you're in good company.
List of champions, right? But they were actually pretty thoughtful about it. I think that was like one of the better kind of takedowns. But in a funny way, like I haven't been particularly impressed by. Well, of course I'm saying this, but I haven't been particularly impressed by the counter arguments. I think that there's, people will sort of like, it's just so vague, right? It's like, people are like, yeah, but like the future, like this is like radical. You're thinking the old way. Like the future is decentralized, and you're like decentralized is like, it's yeah. So for example, right, consensus algorithm. Like what a ridiculous phrase for a majority vote, right? It's like the majority of hash rate is the consensus algorithm, right? Like if I said like, oh, like, Congress has like a consensus algorithm. That's why Congress is so effective. It's decentralized. It's a majority vote, right? And if you look at this like decentralized imaginary world that people are living in, right? Actually, in almost every case, coins are more centralized than banks. You look at like transaction volume globally. You look at asset ownership versus blockchain asset ownership. You look at how trusted the trusted parties are, right? Like people trust Bitfinex, which I think is a mistake, in a way that like nobody actually has to rely on, like BNP Paribas or like the largest, I think there's problems with some of the big Chinese banks, but like actually the scale of the big Chinese banks is like nothing compared to the scale of the big Chinese mining pools in terms of like their ability to bring down an industry because of their untransparency and corruption. Like if you believe in decentralization and transparency, bank in the banking system, which is decentralized and transparent.
Man, I think you make some really good arguments. I'd like to invite any of the listeners out there who can suggest a person to make the strongest counter argument. I'm thinking through our guests, and it really is like these 2 extreme sort of polar views, that are out there. I'm guessing, based on nothing but a guess, that there'll be sort of a merging of all these ideas as it evolves. But how do folks, if you're not on Twitter, how do folks reach out to you or find out more? And if you want, giving that a plug for your own company.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. I get a handful of emails or Facebooks or whatever, or Medium comments. In a funny way, I'm like I'm an odd spokesperson because I mean, like, I actually have a job which I really really like, which is creating a more trustworthy financial institution that is like less vulnerable to scams, and more like protected from fraud. And so, I don't actually, I don't expect to write more about blockchain actually at this point.
That was going to be my next question. When's the
You know,
next article? So you made this may be it. Maybe done with the blockchain. I
yeah,
doubt it,
I
Kai.
think,
I doubt it.
I think that's it. I think, I got invited to be on a panel. I'm like, if you guys want to hear what I say, like, here's my contribution: is just don't host the panel. There's nothing here.
Oh man.
But yeah. So I don't know. I mean, there's a robust public debate, and I think, I guess the thing is, like, like, if you, I don't know, like, look into your heart as like blockchain people, and I'd love to come back and, like, I don't know, take a couple pitches or have a debate or whatever, right, on the show or whatever. But it's like, look into your heart, set aside asset appreciation, and just sort of say, like, like try and do a pitch that has constant coin prices. And, like, there you will see, like, is this about a bubble or is this about building something very fundamental? And I think it's tough if you look into your heart. Here's an interesting thing that I learned actually on Tuesday. People will say digital gold, right? And that was kind of the toughest thing for me, because gold is like, I don't know, that's sort of like respectable, right? And you say, like, the difference between owning a stock and not owning, like, gosh, suppose you take anything and divide it into anything that you could own, and say some people will buy it in order to resell it, and some people will buy it to use it. So suppose the reseller market dries up for real estate, right? You have a home, you can't really sell it, but, like, people can live in it. You could live in it. You could, let somebody else live in it and collect rent. It's like a real asset, right? You have oil, you have, like, coal, you have, like, utilities, you have your stocks. Stocks pay dividends, right? Like an ownership share in a company. I mean, fucking tulip bulbs grow into tulips, right? The tulip craze was, like, actually based on an asset that had some utility, right? And so all these people, you say, hey, you spent, like, millions of, gold pieces or whatever they had in the Middle Ages on these, tulip bulbs. Well, at least you got some tulips, right? Plant a field of tulips. And Bitcoin, if you say, like, suppose you couldn't sell it, suppose you just had to use it for something, what would you use it for? Would you, like, I don't know. It's not that useful. And the counter argument that I struggled with was gold, right? Gold is really kind of only useful for reselling.
Right.
And it turns out, actually, that about 2/3 of the world's gold is used. It's about 50% jewelry, about 20% industrial applications, about 15% national reserves, and about 15% is in the sort of, like, liquid markets that's being used as an asset or a hedge or whatever. But, like, the point is, like, 2/3 of it is not being used as an asset class. It's being used as a very efficient conductor or as a decorative thing. And so if you couldn't, that last 15% that's in the market, if you couldn't sell it to somebody else who just wanted to buy gold to sell it to somebody else, you turn it all into jewelry and it still has value. Which is, I don't know, if 2/3 of Bitcoins were being worn instead of traded, then I would believe in it.
Yeah. You can't wear Bitcoin, folks.
Although you can turn Ethereum into kittens. People were annoyed that the Ethereum blockchain was, like, not clearing because of the volume of crypto kitties, and you're like, this is something of value. People like it.
Yeah.
And that was the one, actually. That was the one that I couldn't argue with on the first piece, where I'd said it was good for illegal transactions. And by the way, illegal is not the same as bad. In Venezuela, if if, transacting freely is illegal, being able to do illegal things may be good in that case. I think that there are some illegal things that shouldn't be done. But, I'm not saying it's bad, but doing illegal things, you can do that easier with cryptocurrency than normal currency. And speculation, while a Ponzi scheme is going, it goes well. But then the third thing was art. If you think there's inherent artistic value in owning Bitcoin, then it is like gold.
You sort of threw out there the idea of having come back on the show and having some other guests, maybe having just a educational debate conversation. I think we should do that because I'm already thinking it. I'm kind of going through my mind now and thinking, okay, what about this use case? But I think I'll come up with some counter arguments later. But let's do that again.
And I could totally learn something. I mean, there definitely could be something, but yeah, it'll be interesting. I'd love that.
So listeners out there, if you got your ears perked up or you're thinking, why the hell am I not thinking of the X question or Y question? Send us a tweet, at Cloning Crypto or at me at Gabe Mott, GABEMOTT. And Kai, thank you so much for coming on. That was really informative.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Have a great day. If you've been enjoying this, or even if you are just one of those generous, awesome people that leave reviews, would you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes? Reviews make such a huge deal, and we don't ask for them often, but please leave a review and share this with your friends. And if you're listening and aren't ready to share, that's cool, but if you've got feedback on what would it take to improve this, what do you want to hear about? What do you want us to ask? Who should we have on as guests? Let us know that. Tweet us at Cloning Crypto. But hey, leave us a review. Make my day. Thank you so much.